Hello, in this video we'll be talking about the liquidity ratio. So in the past few videos we have been covering how to analyze the data that we have collected from the financial statements. So in this video we'll be talking about the liquidity ratio. So stay tuned. So what is a liquidity ratio? This is a very important ratio you have to consider before you invest in any company. So what is a liquidity ratio? So liquidity ratio is it helps you to determine how liquid a company is, which means how easily they can sell their assets to raise money to solve any problems. So let us write that down to check how easily the company can sell its assets. So it has short-term assets and it has long-term assets in any company. So we call them sometimes current assets or short-term assets, and they're very easy to sell. They're usually in terms of cash or short-term treasury bill investments that mature within a few months or so. So they're easy to raise cash. But which is hard to raise cash is to sell long-term assets. For example, you have a property, a very big property, or sets of few properties. It will take a long time to find a buyer for every single property and raise cash through that. So if you have any problem, any short-term problem, like you cannot pay your rent and you need to raise some cash, selling your long-term assets will not be the fastest and more best thing to do. So let us complete this. So to check how easily a company can sell its assets to raise cash to pay for short-term, you can say short-term urgent cash needs, short-term urgent situations. Like, let us write down a few examples over here. Number one, current liabilities are maturing. So current liabilities are like anywhere between 1 month to a 1 year liabilities are coming to a time where we have to return the principal, or the payments are becoming huger that we don't have enough to pay. Another thing is bi-weekly employee salaries, and finally monthly rent. Now if you don't have any cash to pay for this, right, you have to sell some of your assets to raise the cash. So we will see how to check out if a company has all of their assets. Okay, so sometimes what happens is that a company cannot cover their expenses and they go into something called bankruptcy, and we have talked about that in our other types of firms video. And so what happens is that they have to file bankruptcy, in which case they cannot pay for any of their expenses, right? So let us talk about the ratios. Number one, we have current ratio. Okay. The current ratio is equal to current assets divided by the current liability. So when you simplify the formula, when you simplify the ratio, it means that for every $1 of liability, current liability, how much current assets do you have to cover that liability? So let's do some examples to understand. We'll go over 3 scenarios. So the first scenario, we have current assets divided by current liabilities, where the current assets on the top is about, let's say, $5. Right, it can be $5,000, $5. It will simplify eventually. So $5,000 current assets divided by $5,000 of current liabilities, it's 1. So for every $1 of liability they have enough current assets to cover that liability and not go into bankruptcy. So that's an okay scenario. Scenario 2, we have 10,000 current assets and only $5,000 worth of liability. So for every $1 of liability, we have $2 of assets. So we can spend that $1 of assets and still be profitable and have that other $1. So that's a better scenario. And finally, we have one of the worst scenarios where for every $1 of liability, we have only 10 cents of assets. Now, usually if the liability starts to make a problem, the company cannot cover their liabilities and they have to file bankruptcy. Okay. So let us go to something called the quick ratio. Okay, so the quick ratio is a very interesting and insightful ratio. So it consists of current assets, just as the top one, but we have to subtract the inventory. Then we divide it by current liabilities. So why do we subtract the current liabilities? Sorry, why do we subtract the inventory? Because the inventory cannot be sold easily in certain situations. So it is better to take them off when actually evaluating whether the company is in a good financial situation. So the quick ratio is also called the acid test ratio. And let me tell you how the name got there. So during the gold rush, what happened was that there's a lot of people who were selling gold and they didn't know whether the gold was actual gold or some other rock colored to look like gold. So they had to pour some kind of acid on the gold, and they have to check if it erodes, it is not gold, and if it is gold, it will stay strong. So the main idea from that situation is that they wanted to check if it is what it set out to be in the first place. Okay, if it is real gold or not. So how does that apply in our situation? So in our situation, we have to check, does the current ratio actually tell us the big picture, right? Sometimes it doesn't. Sometimes the company has loads of inventory lying around and not being able to sell them. They might be in that kind of business. So we have to take the quick ratio always to make sure to have a better understanding of the firm's financial situation. So if you liked the video, please feel free to subscribe, and thank you for watching till the end.